Australian Portraits 1880 to 1960 paintings from the National Collection is a really exciting travelling exhibition that's from the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra. It's the first time that a major portrait exhibition travelling all states and territories in Australia has been put together by the National Gallery, and it's a really exciting way to share our collection with the people of Australia and to look at exactly why portraiture was so exciting and has made such a wonderful contribution to Australian art. The earliest work in the show is by Robert Dowling, and it's a family commissioned portrait of a beautiful young woman named Dolly, or Miss Robertson. And it was to show not only herself as a sort of a memory of the family, but also the wealth of the family, the status. There was the Japanese tea set. The story is that during the process of painting the portrait, her father, declined her wish to marry the suitor that she would like. So initially Robert Dowling painted her in a white dress, and during the process she demanded that he repaint it with her being pictured in a brown dress to show that she would never marry anyone if she couldn't marry the man she loved. That is hearsay. That's the story that we like to tell. The family are not sure if that's actually the case, but it is a pretty fantastic story. With people like Tom Roberts, he was so adept at capturing likeness and character in his portraits that he was commissioned again and again to capture people, and also began to see portraiture as a way to communicate ideas of nation and the new nation. So his work, Australian Native, which is not titled with the name of the sitter, but with the idea of what a healthy young Australian might look like in 1888. People like George Lambert and Hugh Ramsay had studied in Melbourne, and then they travelled overseas on scholarships, studied in the academies in France, spent time in England, and really absorbed all the wonderful influences of painting at that time, developed quite a sort of a bravura approach to life and painting. George Lambert was known as quite a character, not only in his self-portraits. He depicts himself in a wonderful kind of eccentric manner, but also there are stories of him sort of cartwheeling out of a party to make a sort of a departure. We've got Chesham Street, which is a self-portrait, believed to be a self-portrait of George Lambert, where he's bearing his pearly white chest to the audience and kind of looking down over you, letting you know that he can see you looking at his beautiful chest. The scene is supposed to be perhaps a doctor's studio, a doctor's visit, but really I think it was an excuse for George Lambert to show off a bit. And really I think the confidence, it comes across not only in his sort of appearance and ideas, but also in the confidence in his handling of paint. Hugh Ramsay's portrait of Miss Nellie Patterson is a personal favourite of mine, and I think it is of many of the children who grew up living in Canberra. It's one of those ones that you visit, and as a child you immediately associate with the young girl sitting on the cushion. She's staring out at you with these big brown eyes that are part fear, part curiosity. Hugh Ramsay captured Miss Nellie Patterson as a commission by Dame Nellie Melba, who was little Miss Nellie Patterson's aunt. The enormous cushion she's seated on, apparently she kept sliding off, and they had to sort of give her little lollies as a treat to encourage her to sit still. We believe she's seated in the studio of, or a room in Nellie Melba's house. Phillips Fox and Rupert Bunny both travelled to Europe in the early years of the 20th century, and both studied in academies in Paris and really absorbed different influences. Phillips Fox was quite taken with Impressionism, and you can see that in beautiful works like The Green Parasol. He really just captures the light and colour of his garden in Paris. Rupert Bunny was well known for working in Paris and working in France in the early decades of the 20th century, painting beautiful scenes of luxurious, very well-dressed women in glamorous balconies, beautiful flowers, and he painted his wife quite a number of times, Jean, in scenes where she is looking very glamorous. This is quite unusual. He's painted his wife as an older woman. She's not as glamorous glamorously dressed, and she's looking directly at him. It's kind of, it's a very intimate portrait in that way, where he's framed the portrait just so that it's just her. She might be leaning on a kitchen windowsill or a kitchen table, but it is, it's quite a personal portrait in that way, I think. Modernism arrived in Australia in a big way into the 1920s, and along with artists' approach to all types of genres, their approach to portraiture changed in the use of abstraction and colour and brushstrokes. It was a really exciting time, and you see it in the work of Grace Cossington-Smith and Grace Crowley. Grace Crowley, like Margaret Preston, were experimenting not only with colour but also with the sense of space, so flattening a space and using colour to express form and shape. And it sort of leads up to her complete leap into complete abstraction when she returned to Australia, somewhat reluctantly, in the 1930s. A lot of the modernists were painting people who were around them, so friends, family, and themselves. So we've got self-portraits, a beautiful self-portrait by Grace Cossington-Smith, which is actually quite early in her oeuvre, but it really shows where she was about to go with her use of colour and her brushstrokes. And she depicts herself as a young artist, and she's looking out of the picture frame, and it's really sort of the young artist on the verge of making a really important contribution to Australian art. Moving into the 40s and 50s, the works that are included in this exhibition are by some of Australia's most well-known mid-20th century artists, people like Russell Drysdale, Sidney Nolan, Arthur Boyd, and Albert Tucker, and people who have really made a contribution to where Australian art was going at that time. They're not so well known for their portraits, but the portraits they did paint are very much expressive of what they were looking at that time. Many of those artists had been involved in the Second World War in various ways. In work by people like Albert Tucker, you see a sort of incredible emotion conveyed through his use of colour, through his brushstrokes. It's quite a psychological portrait. It's about conveying the state of mind. Albert Tucker had been conscripted to the army in 1941. He'd worked in the medical section where he was required to paint and draw images of wounds, and I think it had really quite affected his sense of what war was about, and what really asked him to, sort of forced him to question why this was happening. And I think he tries to convey that in his work of that time. It's quite interesting having this work here in Sydney while the Picasso exhibition is on, because really at that time I think he was drawing influence from not only German Expressionism but also the work of Picasso. With Sidney Nolan, he's also not as well known for his portraits, but there's a wonderful portrait that is like an imaginary portrait. You may well know the Ned Kelly series. There is a great portrait of Ned Kelly in this exhibition, but it's not Ned with the helmet, it's Ned as he was taken in a mugshot when he was sent to jail in the 1880s. So it's Ned underneath the helmet. It's sort of getting into the character of the bushranger himself. There's also a portrait of a head of a soldier by Sidney Nolan, and really that captures Nolan's feeling of the time about war. It's what you might call a psychological portrait. The soldier has one eye that's sort of quite enlarged, and it's really quite a sort of a stressed-looking image. This is a charming portrait by John Brack of his 3 daughters. It's intended in a way to show the characters of his different children, but also as a generic portrait of children of that age. It's the late 1950s. The tones suggest the 50s. It's all in these wonderful brown, bricky tones. The pattern, the flattened pattern on the girl's dress kind of mirrors the flat brickwork. It's a wonderful play on space, as we know John Brack really experimented with, and the sort of abstraction from reality. Dusan Marek is a lesser-known Australian artist who emigrated to Australia in 1948 from the Czech Republic. His wife, they'd met on the ship on the way to Australia and just fell in love and married in Australia. This portrait is quite unusual in Dusan Marek's oeuvre. He had been a committed surrealist all his life. This is the only image of her as a portrait. The story goes that when Dusan turned the portrait around after finishing it, she said, "Oh, Dusan, why did you paint me with one eye and two mouths?" And he quipped back, "Oh, because you never look where you're going and you talk too much." As it happens, I believe the story went, because you see everything and you say very little. One of the wonderful things about working with a collection show is that you don't just get the wonderful works that you see on display all the time, the firm favourites that are hardly ever off the walls. It's about going through the storage areas and finding works that fit the theme. So looking for portraits within all the different works that are in the National Gallery's collection and bringing out works that are lesser known, that might be little treasures, little gems hidden. I hope that with Australian portraits 1880 to 1960, you can really get a sense of the vitality of Australian art, of painters who not only worked in portraiture but worked across a wide variety of mediums, but used portraiture to explore different ideas in their art.